Hey folks, Joe Bongiovanni here from the Kettle Pond Institute for Debt-Free Money, and I'm jumping into this little video that's been posted about, the dollar will collapse, prove me wrong, I think, something like that. Um, and I guess what I want to say is, it's, prove you wrong. Prove the negative of your statement. That's not really fair. So, the question really becomes, because there are so many components to what you're saying. Many of them are valid. Some of them, in my opinion, aren't. So I guess I'm going to start out by jumping in having to do with the intrinsic value of the currency. And we're talking now about, electronic currency more than paper currency. But basically, it's just national currency. A nation's currency. The intrinsic value of a nation's currency is zero, and then your whole postulation of why the currency is going to fail and why we should be getting into commodities because we're smart is to me a very, very much of a false statement, a false premise, a false understanding of what really constitute the value of the currency. Okay, what is it that gives a nation's currency value? Now, unfortunately, when you're using the United States dollar as your, I don't want to say whipping boy, but your model, we have the fact that since Bretton Woods, the international community has been using the dollar as the standard for international transactions. Okay, so that's a problem. It's a bit of a problem. But that's what I want to say. The intrinsic and inherent and legal and constitutional and real value of any nation's currency is what it represents, which is the national economy, which is the economy of that nation. The currency represents the value of the national economy. What is the national economy? The national economy is composed of the natural resources, the people, their training, their education, the means of production that exists, the ability of the economy to produce goods and services. Okay? As the ability of the economy to produce goods and services, and therefore the production and consumption of goods and services increases, the value of the currency increases, and the amount of the currency that's needed in order to provide, stable buying power of that currency continually over time requires that we produce more money. So there's my basic, kind of disagreement. Okay. There's not going to be any collapse of the currency because the intrinsic value of the currency equals zero. Okay. As far as inflation and deflation, we had tons of inflation and deflation. Huge, massive increases in the supply of the money, and therefore the inflation, and the contraction of the money, therefore deflation, while we were on the gold standard. So, it has nothing to do with that. We could be on the gold standard or not be on the gold standard. The thing that's going to make the currency worth anything is the national economy. Then think about the government debt. It's like, oh my God, there's $14 trillion in government debt. And I'm not saying that's not a large number. It is a large number. But we have to remember, under the banking system that we have now, the fractional reserve banking system, and the way the currency comes into existence always has a debt through the banking system, there needs to be an increase in government debt, because it is government debt that the bankers trade for their reserves. When I say that, I mean the bankers buy government central bank, buys and sells government securities. That's what it does. So if we didn't have government securities, that is to say, an instrument denominated in the currency of the country what would we have to trade? And then they would have to be dollars, okay? You know, for every time the government issued a debt, if instead it issued a dollar, what would the difference be? What would the difference be? Really, there wouldn't be any difference. There wouldn't be any difference in the national economy, okay? And if they didn't issue the debt, then the bankers couldn't have any. The central bank and the bankers, as the entire banking financial system, couldn't have the basic tool that it needs in order to keep functioning, on an ongoing basis. You know, in theory, the central bank has the mandate to control inflation, control the buying power of the currency, and full employment, as close to full employment. So, in order to do that, it has to be able to do something, you know. And what it has to be able to do, given the fractional reserve banking system, is it has to be able to buy and sell the things that make up the reserve, the real reserve components of the banks, okay, of the central bank. So the fact that we have all that debt is not really that significant, okay? It's a necessary component of the fractional reserve banking system, and you know, it represents basically taking the savings from private people, who, no matter, you know, whether they're this country or not this country, and putting them to work for the government. You know, what's wrong with that? It's done in lieu of taxation. It's not necessary. You know, in fact, you know, we advocate debt-free money, so we advocate that they stop issuing it. And Dennis Kucinich has you know, entered a bill into the Congress to do away with fractional reserve banking, to institute full reserve banking, and to institute a government monetary authority to create the money. So there's nothing inherent in you know, your basic, you know, unit that you're identifying as a problem, and that unit is government debt, that shows anything about the dollar is going to collapse. You know, you're right about the fact that, you know, with the revocation of Glass-Steagall, that you know, banks can do anything they want with money and create their own money. You know, investment banks create their own money. They create their own things that serve as money. They become monetary assets. They're financial assets. They trade as financial assets. They trade as money. So, you know, that's definitely the real problem, and that's definitely going to collapse. But it has nothing to do with the currency. There's no reason for the currency to collapse because of either the existence of the debt or the fact that we're not on a gold standard. It's not there. You make a big deal about the fact that the price of oil is going up and the value of the dollar is going down. Well, the dollar floats, you know, on the foreign exchange market, okay? So when oil goes up, you know, marked in dollars, you know, it goes up in every currency, okay? The only thing that changes relative between the dollar and the other currencies has to do with real economic things, you know. So you can't just say that it's the matter. It's the dollar's going down, you know. If the price of oil is going up, all the nations of the world, the price is going up for all the nations of the world. It's going up for all the currencies of the world. So again, there's no really significant, you know, factors that you've put out there. You know, currency may collapse because of the debt money system. We've been saying that for, you know, along with the Austrians for a long time. But there's nothing really inherent in you know, your observations about the banks and the purchasing of the commodities, and the fact that the only thing that everybody will buy is oil and things. You need money. You need the currency. Thanks.